everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. Many of you we know, but we have some new faces. My name is Penny Wright, and on behalf of all of us at the Rogers Memorial Library, thank you for being here today on this beautiful day. We're glad you chose us over the beach or the swimming pool. As you know, we have a summer author series, and most of you know about that because that's why you're here. But take a flyer for our little series, and I just want to invite you to the next week. We have two authors, James Barron, whose byline you see all the time in the New York Times. He wrote a book about Steinway pianos. Now he's written a book about a stamp. So if you can stretch your imagination. It's actually a fascinating little book, and he is a terrific guy. So that's next Wednesday, and we do love reservations so that we can accommodate all of you with seating if it turns out that you can come. Fridays are not our usual days for authors, and that's why I'm mentioning that next Friday, the 14th of July, Sally Bedell Smith, who has written a bunch of biographies, including a very good one on Queen Elizabeth several years ago. Sally Bedell Smith recently wrote a book that's been getting a lot of press on Prince Charles, which some of you may have read, but that's a big program for us. We have a lot of people coming. It's at 11 o'clock next Friday, the 14th. Tea, coffee, and scones. So we really do ask for reservations on this one. We have a feeling you may be coming to this one. I hope you will. We've got music. We've got a lot of things going on. For those of you who live out of our library district, remember that if you join our Friends of the Library, with whatever kind of donation you want to make, you will receive our bi-monthly newsletters. This is a very good thing because we have lots of things going on here, and we welcome and we love out-of-district patrons coming, but in order to know about them, you have to see something in writing, and you will if you join our friends. I want to thank Southampton Books for being here. That was very sweet on somewhat short notice. Right as you walk in the door, you see books for sale, $17, such a bargain for this wonderful book. Anyway, thank you so much for coming here to sell books. And then I have to put a plug in, I'm sorry, Southampton Books, but we have our own library used book sale, and it's just started being open on Mondays. So after you listen to Michael Schulman today, take a stroll over to the basement of Cooper Hall. They have really great books. So do try our book sale out too. Anyway, today we're so delighted to have a visit from someone who writes for one of our favorite magazines, The New Yorker. He's the arts editor, and his name is Michael Schulman. This is his first book, Her Again, published by HarperCollins. And as some of you know who may have read it, it's about Meryl Streep's coming of age in the 1970s. Michael is the theater editor of Goings On Downtown and a frequent contributor to the Talk of the Town, where you'll see his byline. His work also appears in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, The Believer, and other publications. And we are so pleased that he made time to come out and be here with us today. Please welcome Michael Schulman.
Hi, thank you all so much for coming. I'm so pleased to have you all here on what is a very tempting day outside. And I just want to really thank, first off, the library for bringing me here, and especially Penny Wright for reaching out and bringing me to the Hamptons on a day when I otherwise would have been drabby old New York City. So thanks. So this is the book, Her Again, Becoming Meryl Streep. And as Penny mentioned, it is specifically the story of Meryl Streep's life in the 1970s when she was in her 20s. It's about her coming of age as a woman, an actress, a feminist, and her rise to fame, first on the stage and then in Hollywood. And I first want to just explain a little bit why I decided to tell that story. And in order to do that, I'll start with why I became obsessed with Meryl Streep. I know a lot of us are, for good reason. And of course, I always loved her movies. Growing up, I would see some of them. Death Becomes Her, I think, was my first, weirdly enough. The movie was just like a walking corpse whatsoever. And then gradually fell in love with more and more and more of them. But around 2009, I would say, is when I started strangely becoming really obsessed with her acceptance speeches at award shows. As you know, Meryl Streep wins a lot of awards, so she gives a lot of these speeches. And I noticed that she had developed this way of presenting herself that was simultaneously self-deprecating and completely grand and over-the-top and delicious. Just an example, when she won the Emmy Award for Angels in America in 2004, she got up and she said, there are some days when I myself think I'm overrated, but not today. And then the speech that gave the book its title, in 2012, she won the Oscar for The Iron Lady, and the first thing she said is, when they called my name, it was like I could hear half of America going, oh, come on, what? Her. Again. But whatever. And so I just kind of fell in love with this persona she had developed, which was someone who was clearly at the peak of her career, of her powers, even, as a woman over 50 in Hollywood, which is not easy, who had been put on this pedestal for so long as the greatest living actress that she had sort of simultaneously embraced it and learned to undercut it in a very funny, clever way that would sort of also play up what a great diva talent she is. Because she is, I believe, the greatest actress of her generation. But the whole thing made me start to wonder, well, we've had this person in our lives, Meryl Streep, for so long that it's hard to remember how she got to that point. How did she become this person who is like the greatest actress alive? Was there a moment before that happened where she was just a kind of aimless 20-something trying to figure out what to do in life? How did she learn acting? Can it even be learned? And so I started to think about, what's the contrasting picture to this person that we're seeing constantly at award shows being so deliciously grand? And I decided to write a book that told that story, that told the story of her road to where she got to be. And so it starts more or less in her high school years in suburban New Jersey and takes her through college years at Vassar, her experience at the Yale School of Drama in the mid-70s, which I was really interested in because I was at Yale as an undergrad and did theater there, and always kind of knew about this storied era in the drama school's history where it was Meryl Streep and Wendy Wasserstein and Sigourney Weaver and Christopher Durang and all these talents there at the same time. And then after that, she went to New York City and became the star of Shakespeare in the Park really right away. Playing, Shakespeare, the Shrew and Timothy Shrew and Isabella in Measure for Measure and all these great roles, and then breaking out into these groundbreaking, star-making film roles in the middle of the new Hollywood revolution of the 1970s in movies like The Deer Hunter and Woody Allen's Manhattan and Robert Benton's Kramer versus Kramer. And by the time it's all over, it's 1980, it's a new decade, she's 30, she's married, and she's on her way to being she is the Meryl Streep that we all know now. So that was the story I wanted to tell. How did she get from this person to this person? And along the way, I just found myself so fascinated with all of the different worlds that she traveled in. And at the heart of this story was a kind of double love story. Because as you may or may not know, right on the cusp of fame, Meryl had this intense, passionate, life-changing romance with the actor John Cazale. And John Cazale is just a completely fascinating figure. His name isn't as well known as some of the people he acted with, who include De Niro, Pacino, Gene Hackman, or the directors he worked with, like Coppola. But he's best known as Fredo from the Godfather movies. So everyone knows Fredo, right? But not everyone knows John Cazale, and that's because he very tragically died in 1978 at the age of 42. And at that point, he was in the middle of this whirlwind romance with Meryl Streep. They met doing Shakespeare in the Park in 1976. Summer of 1976, they did Measure for Measure. He was the evil Duke, Angelo, no, sorry, Angelo's not the Duke. He was Angelo, the evil deputy. And Meryl was Isabella, the pure nun, who he tries to defile. And this just set off a completely, passionate romance. They lived together in Tribeca before it was Tribeca, it was called Tribeca, and acted together in The Deer Hunter. And it really just a year or so into their relationship, he was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer, and Meryl was at his bedside until the very bitter end, until he died in March of 1978. And then, amazingly, 6 months later, she married Don Gummer, who's been her husband of 30 whatever years, and they have 4 children together who are now acting, many of them. And in the middle of those 6 months, she started making Kramer versus Kramer, Manhattan, starring in Taming of the Shrew, and also doing the movies, the Seduction of Joe Tynan. So those were the 6 months that catapulted her to fame. They were also the 6 months where she somehow went from this absolute devastating loss to this new love, which she very abruptly married. So I knew from the start that kind of mystery, those 6 months, would be the climax of the book. What was going on? So it almost reminded me of a Meryl Streep movie, someone torn between these two conflicting emotions. But I want to back up. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about what I learned about how Meryl discovered acting, and then I have a kind of surprise for you guys. And then no, she's definitely not here. Oh man, if only. She'll be here in spirit. But before I do that, you're probably thinking at this point, well, did you interview Meryl? Did she help out with this book? The short answer is no, but she didn't hurt either. Essentially, going into this process, I knew the story I wanted to tell, and I knew what I was interested in. And I also knew that Meryl Streep is an incredibly private person who's taken immense pains over the years to sort of lead a normal life. She never really lived in Hollywood. She's lived in Connecticut with her husband, raised these 4 children. And part of her thing is that she wants to speak to her fans through her characters. And that means she doesn't really want to draw too much attention to her own life and biography. And she has really successfully avoided all the kind of movie star trappings that kind of get, ensnare a lot of other people, where it's their fame kind of outruns their craft. And so she's been very disciplined about that, and I think it's completely to her credit. But I also knew that, okay, so she's really not going to, have me come over to her house and tell me her entire life story. This is why she hasn't written her own memoir or done an authorized biography. It's because she has this philosophy about how she wants to be a famous actress. But what I did do is about a couple months into doing my research, I was researching her Yale School of Drama years. I was reaching out to a lot of her old friends and classmates and teachers, and I suddenly thought, well, I don't want her to figure out, learn about this book through the grapevine and have it be sort of misrepresented, I really should just write her a letter. So I wrote a letter through her publicist explaining who I was, why I was interested in her, the time frame of the book, et cetera, and not even asking for an interview, just saying like, I hope that's okay. And she sent back this really fascinating email. I got it within a week through her publicist, and it taught me a lot about who she is. Specifically, the thing that she was concerned about, I mean, anyway, if you hear like someone's writing a book about you, it's probably a very unnerving thing, but specifically, the anxiety she had was that she didn't want to be placed on this pedestal. She said that she didn't want people inflating her any more than they can possibly stand already, and that she wanted to go to her next project, her next table read for her next movie, without this kind of baggage surrounding her, which of course she has already. And I realized that this is sort of and the line that I loved from this letter, which was so interesting, where she said, "Lead me to the thing I love. I love acting, but to be called the greatest living actress, a designation not even my own mother would sanction. A thing that in our sports-mad world where we have the greatest this and the best that is the opposite of good or valuable or useful. It is a curse for a working actor." And apart from that, she very graciously kind of left me to my own devices. She didn't say that she would go and tell everyone she knew, like, beware of this guy. She said, if you want to interview people, it's really up to them. And that was hugely helpful to me because, she could have very easily made this very, very difficult. Instead, she kind of was benevolently hands-off, I would say. And I was very grateful for that because I really just wanted to be able to do my research, visit libraries, contact people who knew her in the 70s, etc. But it also, this letter really gave me an insight into her, which is that at the time I was researching her years at Yale School of Drama, and she was really the star student there. The dean of the school was Robert Brustein, who kind of ran the whole thing like a fiefdom and, made it as competitive as the real acting world. There was no egalitarian, ethos to the school. You had to fight for roles. And so someone like Sigourney Weaver, who at the time was this kind of hippie weirdo who wore crazy rags and clothes and stuff and really didn't want to be a leading lady. She could not get a part to save her life. She never got cast. And then meanwhile, Meryl got cast so frequently that she had to beg, like, I'm getting exhausted here. Can I not play, Helena in Midsummer Night's Dream next semester? And the dean would say, no, you're too good. We have to have you. And she got an ulcer. She had to go to the psychiatrist at school, and it was a really stressful time for her. But before that, she had been kind of homecoming queen and cheerleader at her high school. And a little later in the 70s, when she first became famous, she was put on the cover of Newsweek as the star for the 80s, and she really kind of didn't like all the attention, and she didn't like being on magazine covers. And I realized from this letter that she sent me that this is sort of part of what happens when you are Meryl Streep, which is that any kind of ecosystem she enters, she rises to the top because she is so incredibly talented. But then she kind of gets uncomfortable up there because she realizes that she's not on the same plane as her peers and the people she, her friends. And it kind of builds up this resentment from people. Actually, there's a great story of her doing a cabaret her last year at Yale School of Drama where she sang the song Lonely at the Top. So people could not have liked, but it was that same sort of making a joke out of it that she now does at award shows, where she says, there are some days I myself think I'm overrated. So for her, this is why I call the book Her Again, because I feel like this is sort of from the beginning, what she's had to do is kind of make a joke of it, of her superiority to all other human beings before anyone else could make a joke about it. But I also wanted it to have a double meaning, where it was not just her again, as she would say, but her again, like who is this person who we've come to know over such a long period of time as a famous person. Who was she before she was famous? So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what I learned about how she discovered acting. And I'll start with her description of her very first acting role. is a story she told. I remember taking my mother's eyebrow pencil and carefully, this is 9 years old. I remember taking my mother's eyebrow pencil and carefully drawing lines all over my face, replicating the wrinkles that I had memorized on the face of my grandmother, whom I adored. I made my mother take my picture, and I look at it now, of course. I look like myself now and my grandmother then. But I do really remember in my bones how it was possible on that day to feel her age. I stooped, I felt weighted down, but cheerful, you know? I felt like her. And it's so funny to imagine that after seeing The Iron Lady, where she basically does that again. She plays someone much older and stooped and elderly, and so convincingly. So I think that from the beginning, part of her innate ability was this capacity for empathy, for sort of, and also for working from the outside in. You know, one of the people she's worked with most consistently over the years is her makeup and hairstylist, Roy Helen. He's one of 2 people that she thanked in that Oscar speech for The Iron Lady, her husband and Roy Helen, because they've been with her the longest. And so you see how makeup helps her transform and feel like a different person, and have this kind of radical empathy for lives that are very different from her own. So when Meryl Streep was a little girl growing up in Bernardsville, New Jersey, she did kind of look like someone much older than herself. She describes her look as kind of a middle-aged secretary. She had these kind of cat-eye glasses and short brown hair. And then at a certain point, when she entered high school, she discovered something that interested her more than being kind of rambunctious, and which was boys. And she made a very conscious decision. She describes it in a very detailed way when she was going in 9th or 10th grade, to become a different person, the kind of person who would attract boys. And so she got rid of her glasses and started wearing contacts. She got rid of her braces. She dyed her hair gleaming gold. And she practiced her giggle. She tried to make it lighter, the way boys liked it. And she joined the cheerleading squad, and she dated football players, and she became the homecoming queen. And she describes this as her first acting role. And so she applied that intense sort of character study that she could do on someone like her own grandmother, on this ideal of the kind of the ideal sort of popular American girl. And she just pushed that as far as she could go. And because she was Meryl Streep and had that ability, she perfected this character, and it convinced everyone. And her senior year, she was elected homecoming queen, which was kind of like winning Best Actress at her high school. And I'm just going to read something that she says about that character that she played. So this is her senior year. I reached a point senior year when my adjustment felt like me, she said. I had actually convinced myself that I was this person and she me, pretty talented, but not stuck up. You know, a girl who laughed a lot at every stupid thing every boy said, and who lowered her eyes at the right moment and deferred, who learned to defer when the boys took over the conversation. I really remember this so clearly, and I could tell it was working. I was much less annoying to the guys than I had been. They liked me better, and I liked that. This was conscious, but it was at the same time motivated and fully felt. This was real acting. So, I mean, I find that so fascinating, but it then evolves, because then in 1967, she went to Vassar. And Vassar at the time was an all-girls school. And this period in her life I thought was so interesting, because over the 4 years that she was in college, she started out in an all-girls environment. By the end, Vassar had switched to co-ed. And in the middle there, she spent a semester at Dartmouth, which was an all-boys school, but had this exchange program where a couple of, like 60 young women came from girls' schools. So in 4 years, she was in an all-female environment, an all-male environment, basically, except for her and a couple others, and a mixed environment. And this really taught her so much about gender roles. I think it really formed the foundation of how she thought of her career as an actor when she got into the professional realm. I think part of what accounts for her longevity as an actress is that she went into her career really never thinking of herself as an ingenue. She didn't want to play a blonde, as she put it. And there were roles that she turned down because she thought, I don't want to be the love interest, the sex symbol, the girlfriend, wife. She really wanted to play. She wanted to be in stories where she could be a central, strong female character that wasn't defined by her relationship with the men in the story. And she was incredibly single-minded about that. And the other goal she had was that she didn't want to be typecast. So she played all sorts of people her first few years in the New York theater scene. She played a woman, and Tennessee Williams played 27 Wagons Full of Cotton, where she was like this buxom Southern hussy, and she wore a fat suit. She wore a stuffed brassiere, and it's a completely a comic, kind of slovenly, physically comedic performance that is fascinating. And then she would play Kate in Taming of the Shrew, which she had these strawberry blonde curls and was this tough, woman who could beat people up, and that was really sort of training for the kind of career she would have in movies, which is so different from many of the actresses of her generation who kind of traded on a movie star persona. You think of someone like Jessica Lange, who had this kind of sexy, dewy quality, or Faye Dunaway, who had a kind of femme fatale persona as a movie star that carried over from role to role, whereas Meryl really wanted to be completely different, one role to the next. And you see the roots of that in her training as a repertory actress in the Yale School of Drama, from the role she played in Shakespeare in the Park, with the Public Theater, etc. But I'm getting ahead of myself because I want to talk a little bit about Vassar and the experience that she had there. So she got to Vassar, as I said, 1967, and not being around boys all the time gave her this space to figure out who she was beyond being a cheerleader and a blonde and someone who football players liked. And so here's another quote that of her describing those here. She says, I made some very quick but lifelong and challenging friends, and with their help, outside any competition for boys, my brain woke up. I got up and I got outside myself and I found myself again. I didn't have to pretend. I could be goofy, vehement, aggressive, and slovenly, and open, and funny, and tough. And my friends let me. I didn't wash my hair for 3 weeks once. They accepted me like the Velveteen Rabbit. I became real instead of an imaginary stuffed bunny. And it was her junior year that she had her first very serious acting role. In high school, she had been in the High School Musical. She played Marion the Librarian in The Music Man and Laurie in Oklahoma. But she really said she thought about the singing and sort of singing, dancing, performing. And she hadn't thought about dramatic acting because she'd never seen a serious dramatic play until she was cast in Strindberg's Miss Julie in 1969 at Vassar. And if you know anything about the play Miss Julie, it's an incredibly complex, layered, self-contradictory personality, that character. Really hard for anyone to play, much less a completely inexperienced, 19-year-old. And she really worked on instinct. See, this is her talking about the play. The play seemed to work just a strange magic on her. She said, it was a very serious play and I had no idea what I was doing, really none. But oh my God, it was just a place to tap into all sorts of feelings that I never had, I guess, admitted to myself or felt like parading in front of a group of people. So you see then, just at the dawn of the 70s, Meryl Streep discovering that she had this kind of technicolor world of emotion within her that she could access. in a way she couldn't really describe. And what's so fascinating is that she still can't really describe it. You know, people always say that she's technical. She's full of technique, Meryl Streep. But if you hear her talk about her acting, she has no technique. She has nothing that she could describe. She couldn't teach an acting class. She couldn't describe. She couldn't explain what she does. It's a kind of grab bag of intuition, empathy, impulse. You know, she looks at people and tries to observe them and incorporate that. It's makeup. But you know, in terms of something like the method, which is very kind of codified thing that people study, she doesn't have that. And part of the reason I think she doesn't like talking too much about her process is that she has this sort of worry that if she talks about it too much, it'll go away. Because there's something about it that's mysterious even to her, which I find so fascinating, but also a good reason for her not to write her memoirs. So, keeping track of the time also. Oh, so I think it's time for the surprise. Okay, so so I talked to a lot of people. I talked to about 80 people or more, people who knew her back in the 70s. And one of the people I was so surprised and amazed to discover was this guy, Mike Booth, who ended up playing a really big role in the book. And Mike Booth was Meryl's high school sweetheart. So football player she dated, they went to the prom together. And then after high school, she went to Vassar and he went to Vietnam as a medic. And while they were at Vassar, she wrote him letters in Vietnam and he wrote back letters to Vassar. And I found this guy just by visiting her hometown in Burnsville, going to the public library and looking through a directory and I called a bunch of people whose names I had seen thrown around in various interviews and things. And it turns out that he had this treasure trove. He was like, yes, I'd love to talk. I mean, he turned out to have an incredible story all of his own, which wound up in the book, which was that you know, he went to Vietnam and then came back after a couple of years and had this sort of classic experience of so many people of that generation who came back to their lives in their hometowns and the girl back home and really didn't know how to fit in anymore because he had had this really intense, you know, traumatizing but thrilling experience abroad. And he and Meryl kind of started dating again while she was in college, but then they just drifted away and went different directions, and then she, of course, became hugely famous, and he went to work in his family pigment business and kind of watched her star rise. But what was so fascinating about that was, you know, of course, a few years after they parted ways, her first big movie role and her first Academy Award nomination was for The Deer Hunter, where she plays that role of the girl back home for all these guys in Vietnam who leave from the small town and then come back and can't really adjust. So I found that incredibly interesting that she had played that role sort of in life for someone, and I found his stories about Vietnam and about knowing the young Meryl so interesting. But what I thought was really the treasure trove from this guy is that he had saved all of her letters to him in Vietnam that she wrote to him for 50 years. And he let me read them. And so I got this glimpse into this awakening that she describes. My brain woke up, she says, kind of in real time as she's describing it to him. But the problem is, the copyright is such that if you write a letter, you are the owner of that letter, of the intellectual property of that letter, even if it's 50 years later and you don't know it exists. So I was able to really learn a lot from those letters and quote kind of a little bit of them here and there in the book and learn about the experience she was having and describe them. But I wasn't able to, you know, reproduce entire letters in the book. So for about the year and a half I was working on the book, and afterward they kind of sat on my laptop. But I brought them here, and I'm going to read them to you in full. So these are a couple letters that Meryl wrote to Mike in 1967 to 68. And just to set the scene, she's at Vassar. He's at this point stationed in Germany en route to Vietnam. And Vassar is her freshman year at Vassar. It's still an all-women's school. And one small thing you should keep in mind is that Vassar at this point was exploring ways to become co-ed. And one of them was that they were considering selling off the entire campus and moving to New Haven and merging with Yale, which obviously did not happen. But that's something that she mentions here. Okay, so first letter. Dear Mike, I guess you know who this is by the ostentatious letterhead. I will be very surprised if this reaches you, because I'm using an address Summers gave me when you were first shipped to Bavaria. I have no idea what to say to you. I just know I wanted very much to write. Your mother and sisters say to my mother that you write very informative letters, but don't say anything about how you are, your feelings, etc. I can sympathize. Your correspondence sounds like mine, to home, from here. I'll tell you something about Vassar. It is very big, and yet the classes and houses, not dorms, are quite close-knit. There is a real spirit here that is a lot like school rah-rah spirit, but not as lowbrow. People really love this school, and there's a lot of pride that makes it run almost socialistically smoothly. The paper and school government go uncensored and have done so for over 20 years. I was really apprehensive about coming here, but there are so many different people I needn't have worried about being thrown amongst debutantes and greasy grimes. There are a lot of both groups here. Some belong to both categories, but there are tons of miscellanies, like myself. I have found so many friendly people who almost break their backs to help me and give me the same generosity that seems to be the spirit around here. Most impressive, if corny, ceremony I've undergone so far has been convocation, signaling the termination of orientation at the beginning of classes. It was held on the hills around Sunset Lake one late afternoon. Everyone wore white, and the entire faculty, including deans and professors emeriti, were seated in robes on the platform. A very aesthetically moving scene, right? No. But what really rocked me was just thinking how some of the greatest minds alive were sitting there in front of me, little Meryl Streep, and they were actually prepared to meet me face to face in a seminar. Wow, it's enough to strip your ego to the bone. The way the speeches were presented, such colorful, delightful language. I don't want to bore you, but I'm so excited about the prospect of actually learning and discovering things, and more amazing, wanting to do so. My courses include Drama 106, which is History of the Theater, Drama 171, which is Performance Techniques, Music 105, a Harmony and Fundamental Framework course, Music 107, Performance, English 105, covering contemporary literature with an emphasis on writing, religion, and a mere introduction to a very good course up here, and Italian 105, just for the hell of it. I'm going to try out for the college choir, which does sacred music and tours cathedrals in Europe in the spring. There are so many amazing people here. I am really awed. Always, Meryl. P.S. I would like to hear from you soon and often. Letter number 2. This one came with a pressed orange maple leaf. Dear Michael, I hope you can come up here in January. You will see Vassar at its most morbid, morgish, gray, and melancholy best. And January is exam month. First 2 weeks of study and then exams. It will be wonderful to have a happy experience during what I expect to be a fairly horrible and demanding month. I saw Simon and Garfunkel up at Dartmouth last weekend. They were really so great, but I can't explain. Aside from being such excellent musicians and eloquent poets, when they are before a really somewhat sympathetic audience, as sympathetic as Dartmouth can be, the thing that really gets you is the personal and directly emotional quality that just radiates from their spotlighted voices and faces. I mean, when they, Garfunkel actually, sang for Emily Wherever I May Find Her, when he, in his heart, almost screamed, "I love you, girl, oh how I love you." It was like being transfixed, whatever that means. I don't know. It's really such a worn-out understatement, but somehow when he sang the words, it was almost like the beautiful feeling you have when someone first tells you the same thing. I can't understand how he can, after singing that song as many times as he has, still make it so earth-rocking. Always, Meryl. Next letter. Dear Michael, I want to write something, so I write to you. I'm having a severe identity crisis. I'm looking for a worthwhile thing, in and out and among all the worthless things with which I occupy my time. I just asked a girl down the hall if I had a fever, just to feel a hand on my forehead. This sounds so worthless too, but I'm looking wildly around for something real that hits me in the face, that I am engrossed in, so as to lose this preoccupation with I, me, that is so important now. These are pretentious words for the feeling that really is racking me and has been for days and weeks and more. It will not leave either and recurs in dreams and always when I am in an inane dorm room conversation or being an intellect with Bob, my new thing at Yale. Nobody does it for me. It has to come from me, for me. Perhaps you could help. You probably could. And not make me forget this or be a substitute for its anxiety, but maybe in a way, in your way, be sympathetic. There's no more I could ask for. I tend now, however, perhaps because of distance, physical, spiritual, to make you, Mike, what I am searching for, or something which you represent to me, something I value above all things. I wish so hard you were here always. I miss your presence, or at least your word. James Joyce really has me flying around. His portrait, you know, some sort of autobiography, is so greatly personal. I see you there, me, everybody. There's so much I cannot understand in his work. He was a genius, they say, that I am confused and at the same time relish this confusion. I wish you would read it and tell me what you think. I finished it tonight. If I were, I suppose, really a believer in all these things I've said, I would cherish the book and read it several times. But now I'm very weary of his thoughts for him, and I'm stuck in me again, so that I try to apply them to myself, and I'm not greatly interested in how they pertain to him. He opened it up for me, but I'm unwilling to keep on pushing. How is the continent and our defense efforts? What is it like being you? Te aspetto e le tue parole come sempre. Meryl. Dear Michael, happy birthday. You are 20 in time. You have exactly, minutely, precisely 10 years to accomplish what Christ did by the time he was 30. Thank you for writing. It is so wonderful for me to get letters from you, and contrary to your admonition, I did take the poem very seriously, of course. You know I would, goddammit. That's why you sent it. It is more than true, beautiful, and clear. It is frightening. I'm not angry at all. I thank you. The truth is, I think I read that once last year without seeing it, if you know what I mean. Yes, Vassar is doing this $125,000 a year study on the Vassar-Yale merger. The genuine feeling around here is that it will never go through because by deserting Poughkeepsie and the traditionally sentiment-soaked campus, Vassar will have to let go a lot of faculty in favor of the somewhat superior Yale one. So the professors are against it, especially the old patriarchs who add little but their presence scholastically. And then also Vassar, believe it or not, has one of the largest, if not the largest, endowment of any college, mostly supplied by rich old alumni. These, if we move, will change their wills, and there go the 71% of all Vassar students who are on scholarship. It sounds really mercenary, but this place no longer houses the top 10 debs of society. There are plenty, but mostly the girls are having some type of help paying for the college. That's why the tuition's relatively cheap. Yale is really tremendous. I really think they should move to New Haven if we are going to catch up, or maybe loosen up as much as, say, Antioch or even Swarthmore. It's really so unnatural, especially the social relationships, hectic, frantic, rushed, etc. Now they have affiliations between certain colleges at Yale and houses here at Vassar. That sets up an easier way to have, friends-lovers instead of weekend lover babies. They have buses that leave here every Wednesday night and on weekends. Last night I went down to visit some friends and we heard William Manchester, the author, speak. It's so great, though the guys still have the, hey, wow, there's girls here, and I can see it will, through these midweek meetings, progress and settle into something easy and pleasant, and then she draws a male sign. Relationships, which heretofore have been impossible. Please keep writing, Michael. I look forward to your words. Wish me your luck. Love, Meryl. P.S. I'm not flunking here. It's not hard at all. The reading is fantastic. Read Joyce, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and also very great is Richard Rubinstein, after Auschwitz. This is the last letter. Dear Michael, what is it about us? You say you wonder why we don't know each other, but why are we always seeking to know? What is it that causes the mention of your name to twinge such an incredibly familiar, annoyingly personal pain in my mind? You say I disappointed you incredibly. Could I ever please you? I have tried, and I have not tried. You propose that we should try to be each other's crutch until we no longer need them. When will I no longer need you? I do know it would be wonderful to help each other, to look together at these things that can't be seen alone. You know the lovely pictures we came close to living once or twice. I'm getting older, and I realize more and more the times, not the time, I have lost without thinking. I have not thought, and I thought I'd felt what I had not. I have come to the brink of something very frightening and very wonderful. I'm not sure what to do or how to do it. I'm never sure. The magic is never gone, Michael. I believe in magic, whenever, however, wherever. And then she draws the infinity sign. Meryl. Okay, and now I will... That's for your ears only. I'd love to take some questions for a couple minutes if you have them. Back there, yes.
Yes, you refer to her, or you said you think she is the world's greatest, the greatest living actress. Does that include the whole world?
So the whole world. Oh man, I mean, I don't know if I am the ultimate judge on the greatest living actress, but for some reason that phrase has been affixed to her, and it just stuck. And I know she hates it, as she wrote to me in her letter. I mean, I think there are several very worthy other actresses.
Yes.
You got one?
Helen Mirren and Judi Dench.
Helen Mirren and Judi Dench. Those are very, very good actresses. I wouldn't argue. Sometimes people ask me, who's the runner-up? Who's the next Meryl Streep? And I can only tell you some actresses I also really love. Julianne Moore, Cate Blanchett, Sarah Paulson, Isabelle Huppert, Viola Davis, who's someone who Meryl has really championed. I think these are all actors who really push themselves, sort of in the way that Meryl isn't content to be a kind of, sex symbol love interest, fall into these female archetypes that Hollywood so often pushes women into being. And they're all people who I think take a real variety of roles and push themselves and metamorphose from role to role. Back there.
Yeah, hi. What was it that broke up the Michael relationship? You may have mentioned it before, but...
With Mike. Yeah, with the guy writing the letters.
Right.
That is covered in the book. So he gets home from Vietnam, and they start to hang out on the summers when she's back in New Jersey, and he is there working in like a shoe store and trying to find his footing again. But he was very unsettled. He had this experience of having been in Vietnam and having to adjust, and he describes this feeling of like people not understanding him, asking him all the wrong questions. A lot of people have that experience, as I'm sure some of you know, coming back from war. And eventually he went off to, and he also felt kind of alienated from Meryl because she had gone to this fancy school and was learning, having all these academic experiences, and also really being part of the kind of counterculture, campus counterculture of the late 60s and early 70s, the anti-war movement, etc. And he just felt like he had missed this opportunity. He had been away. He had missed so much of the rock and roll thing, and he read in Vietnam. He read, as much as he could with what was there, but he wasn't being educated. He found her friends kind of snobby, and he had this story of visiting her on campus at Vassar and saying that he really loved Ezra Pound, and one of her friends said, well, you know, he was an anti-Semite, and like he knew that, they just felt like he was being talked down to. So that they kind of had just had these different life experiences that were so different that they couldn't really reconnect. And so she, you know, went off to Yale. He went off to Mexico to sort of to go to college there and find these new adventures. This craving for, you know, going somewhere, doing these intense experiences and finding himself, and they just drifted apart.
I just have a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
What attracted her to her husband?
What attracted her husband? That relationship was really interesting. You know, I think part of it is that they were both extremely talented at different things in different ways. You know, he's a sculptor, and his creativity is all physical. You know, he makes these sort of large abstract objects out of stone and you know, plywood, and it's all about space, you know, physical space and geometry. And of course, she's all about, you know, behavior and people. And she would describe some of the early dates going to museums. And he actually has this quote. He says, she would help me, I would help her look at objects, and she would help me look at people. So I think that's sort of what their relationship is about being extremely creative and intelligent in different ways. And personally, I think that's a great model for a relationship. I'm married to an architect, and as a writer, it's like we have different intelligences, different insights into things. So yeah, I feel like I kind of get it. Back there.
I know you picked a select few letters to read, but I do wonder, she shared, the letters were almost solely her sharing her life with him. Were there other letters where she asked him much more about his experiences?
You know, the weird, do people need me to repeat the questions?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so the question was, you know, she shares so much in her letters about her experiences. Are there more where she asks about his experiences? You know, the weird thing about letters I found at doing this research is that the person who winds up with them is the recipient. So this guy, Mike Booth, who most of the world's never heard of, has in his possession these incredibly intimate letters of 19-year-old Meryl Streep talking about these formative experiences discovering music and literature. And she doesn't have them. If anything, she has his letters about Vietnam, you know? So it's just a one-sided conversation. Now, luckily, I was able to talk to Mike in depth about his experiences, so I can describe what he was going through. But the tricky part about that is that in researching the book, there's no one place where all of Meryl Streep's correspondence is. So I had to think, you know, who would she have been writing letters to? And do some of those people have archives, et cetera, in libraries? So for instance, toward the end of researching the book, I had this moment where I was like, maybe this acting teacher she had at Yale, Bobby Lewis, who was part of the Actors Studio, maybe he has papers somewhere. And I Googled it and found out that they were at, you know, Chapel Hill. And so I contacted the librarians at Chapel Hill and said, is there anything like from Meryl Streep? And they came back with this incredibly, like 4 letters, and one of them was this incredibly insightful account that she gives to Bobby Lewis about being with John Cazale in the hospital and sort of her having to sort of put on a show of being cheerful. And you know, everyone who described that experience of being around her during John's illness said that she never showed any weakness. She was always strong, cheerful, upbeat. He was going to make it through. And I sort of was like, oh, maybe she just was that way. And then this one letter that she had written to Bobby Lewis, which is sitting in, you know, a deep archive in Chapel Hill, she describes the experience of how vulnerable she was. So as a researcher, I thought that was a fascinating challenge, that I had to think, well, who would she have been writing letters to? Because the people who write letters to her, that's their letters. So really interesting. Okay, other questions?
Could I make an observation?
Yeah.
When you read these letters, it seems to me there's something sort of very self-aware. I mean, in other words, almost as if she's writing these letters thinking that they may be read. They're quite formal in a way. They're not, to me, they don't convey like warmth. I mean, that's just my own personal impression. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, she does, she takes pain with her words in a way that seems kind of almost unnatural to me.
Right.
To me.
Well, that's interesting. I just think that the letters seem almost written to be read like for posterity. I mean, I don't think she thought she was going to be a famous person,
Yeah.
and anyone ever read. I truly don't. You know, some people write letters, and like I don't know, Jackie O maybe, like, and they're for posterity, or Princess Diana or something. But she really did not imagine herself being a world famous person. I think one, she's a really excellent writer. You know, having received an email from her, she does have very, and also you can see in these acceptance speeches, she has really a way with words. But also I think there was a sort of art of letter writing that we've lost since 1967, because people don't write letters anymore. And having seen the letters in person, they were extremely beautiful handwriting, very elegant handwriting, cursive. So I do think there was thought put into them. But I do think they were really just for Mike. Yeah.
Has she reacted to you since the book, first-hand or second-hand?
Has she reacted to the book? Okay, so I haven't heard from her since the book came out. The only thing I've heard is that she talked about it on Terry Gross. So last summer she was promoting Florence Foster Jenkins and went on a big press tour, and I thought the book had just come out a few months before, and I was like, someone's going to ask her about it. Something is going to happen. And finally, Terry Gross, who was obviously a really good interviewer, one of her last questions was, so this guy Michael Schulman wrote a book about you, and I know you didn't participate in it. What is your reaction to something like that? And she gave this answer that was, in a word, ambivalent. And what was interesting about it for me, because obviously I was very interested in what she would have to say, is that she kept kind of going back and forth. Like, it went something like, Michael's a perfectly nice man, but I begged him not to write the book. But it was done it came from a really honest, it was done in good faith, but it was also, I don't know, intrusive maybe. Some of my friends have read it, but I haven't read it. So it just, her mind went in a million different places, and to me, the way I sort of interpreted it was that she really does maintain that abstract reasoning that she wrote to me, which is like, I don't want people officially doing this, I don't want people to, all the focus to be on me and my life story. I want them to be on my craft and my characters. But the book that came out, really didn't do anything detrimental to her life or her art, and I think was done in, I like to think, in a really respectful way. And I think it's sort of the best possible version of a book that someone could write without her participation, which is just what I hope is a kind of honest interrogation of how she became this master craftswoman at acting, and how she sort of defined herself as a young woman. And I don't think there's anything really gossipy in it or scandalous. I mean, it sort of describes obstacles she went up against, but I went into it with a very clear, honest goal that I told her about. And so that was the reaction I got, and I was sort of like, okay, interesting. I think she didn't want to go as far as to say, oh, it was wonderful, please, more people write more books about me, because she really doesn't want that. But it hadn't really, she didn't really have anything, pragmatically to object to about it. So anyway, over here.
She has spent most of her life.
What is that? It's a duck.
She spent most of her life morphing into other personalities, totally submerging, which is part of her craft and why she's so fabulous. I wonder who the real Meryl Streep is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after you've done these heavy-duty movies that take a year or two to research and develop and do, you don't just walk out of all that emotion and feeling and
Yeah.
not being touched by it. I just wonder who she really is.
Yeah, that's
It's
true. That's
mysterious.
absolutely, yeah. The question is, she's someone who morphs into all these different roles, and who is she when she steps out of them? Who is she? How do you extract yourself from all that intense emotion? And that's a really interesting question. And for me, there's one point where she describes herself in 1979 as she compares herself to Margaret Mead, the anthropologist. She talks about how Margaret Mead would go to these islands, Samoa, and learn things as an outsider. And she sort of felt that's what she does, is that instead of method acting where you dredge up all your inner emotion and your experiences, she really thinks of herself as somebody who can look at other lives and other people who are very different from her, have other accents, of course, live in other centuries and other worlds, and become them through empathy. So that really put her in contrast with a lot of the actors of her generation. And the ending of the book is all about Kramer versus Kramer and her clashes with Dustin Hoffman, who was an intense method actor and felt like not only should he draw on all his own kind of deep emotion and agitation, but that he should get it out of everyone else too, using what he knew about their lives. And that became a big source of conflict between the two of them. The other thing I would say about that is that one thing that I found really striking and really important to who she is, even at this early stage of her life, is feminism. And this was a pleasant surprise to me in my research because I knew that, the Meryl Streep we know now is very vocal, very outspoken, and does, she has advocated for the Equal Rights Amendment to be brought back in Congress, and of course stumping for Hillary Clinton, speaking of the DNC. And the book, in researching the book, I really found that the roots of that were in the 70s second wave feminist movement. She was coming of age at the time of Gloria Steinem and Ms. Magazine and consciousness raising groups and all of that, and it really formed a kind of worldview that steered her toward not just being a certain kind of person, but a certain kind of actress as well, who when she came up against the kind of sexism in Hollywood and double standard, said no. So that's something that I was able to trace, and that I do think is a big part of who she really is.
You want to take one
Yeah,
question?
one more question. How about over here?
I was just wondering, what kind of relationship, if
Speak
any,
louder.
did she have with Jean Arthur?
Oh yeah, what kind of relationship did she have, if any, with Jean Arthur? Jean Arthur taught at Vassar while she was there, but to be honest, I didn't put that in the book because I didn't think it was a very significant relationship. There are other mentors that she had who were very, very formative, and so I kind of focused on them. I mean, it was interesting that she kind of crossed paths with this Hollywood legend while she was at school, but I kind of didn't get the sense that it was that important. There was another drama teacher who really gave her all these roles. His name was Clint Atkinson. He said, she can play Miss Julie, I know it, and started putting her in all the college plays, etc. And then other mentors who were discussed throughout the book. One who was really, really important is Joseph Papp at the Public Theater, who just before she even moved to New York made her the star of a public theater play, and it made her the leading lady at Shakespeare in the Park. So he is a huge character in the book, and someone who I think played an enormous role in why she is the actor that she is. So Jean Arthur kind of, with all these other people who, people sometimes ask me who discovered Meryl Streep, and it was like, 5 different people, but also someone would have, no matter who, because she was so talented. But there were some really important formative people like those. Okay, well, I have to wrap it up, but I just want to say thank you all so much for coming. I will be in the back of the books if you want to buy one. I'm happy to sign them.